Hey guys, tonight we step into a world where logic is optional. Pigs need legal representation, and being too clean might land you in trouble. We're traveling back to medieval Europe, a time when your socks were probably wooden, your diet was 78% turnip, and your chances of surviving a trial depended heavily on whether you look guilty while holding a goat.so. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with your location and local time. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the middle of a cobbled village square, just past sunrise. The air smells like wet wool, cabbage, and old firewood. Roosters have done their job and fallen silent. Somewhere in the distance, someone's churning butter with great hostility. You're here to see a pig on trial. No, not a metaphor, a literal pig, on trial, wearing what appears to be a tiny collar made from old curtain scraps and looking genuinely confused about its circumstances. The crowd has gathered peasants with turnip-stained hands, a few hunched nuns, and one extremely proud town crier who seems entirely too excited about today's case. A scribe with stained fingers is already scratching ink onto parchment, documenting the moment. He's very serious about it, even though his writing desk is just two overturned buckets. A bailiff clears his throat and reads the charges. The accused did knowingly root through Mistress Eldra's cabbage patch, consume 5 heads of cabbage, and, in its greed, trample a sacred onion. The pig, to its credit, does not contest the charges. It oinks. This may seem like a fever dream, but in medieval Europe, putting animals on trial was a thing. A very real, very official thing. Pigs, goats, cows, even insects were sometimes dragged before courts, accused of crimes ranging from theft to murder, and these trials weren't just theater. There were records, legal arguments, sometimes even appointed defenders. In France, a pig was once hanged for allegedly killing a child. The town considered this an act of justice. It's unclear what the pig thought of the arrangement, but it was presumably not thrilled. Today's trial is more modest. Your village isn't executing anything, just trying to decide if the pig should be exiled. There's a debate about whether exile will even matter, since pigs aren't known for respecting borders. Should we tattoo its ear with a mark of shame? Someone suggests. Another man yells, "No, give it a bell so we hear it coming next time." A third shouts, "It's a pig, not a knight." Historians still wonder whether these animal trials were entirely serious, or if they were a kind of community ritual, something between justice and performance art. The records we have are a bit too detailed to be jokes, but just whimsical enough to make you squint. You lean against a cart filled with leeks and watch as the pig's defender, a very nervous young man with hay in his hair, argues that the pig was simply following its nature. It saw cabbage. It ate cabbage. It knows not sin, he pleads dramatically. The judge, an elderly man who's clearly just here for the theatrics, strokes his beard with great deliberation. "But what about the onion?" he finally asks. The crowd gasps. The pig oinks again. At this point, someone offers the pig a piece of dry bread. It accepts, which the prosecution interprets as a sign of guilt. The trial lasts 2 hours, during which the sun grows hot, someone faints, and a chicken walks across the court and is briefly considered a witness. In the end, the pig is found guilty not of moral wrongdoing, but of disturbing the peace. Its punishment? Relocation to a nearby farm with fewer cabbages. It is technically banished. The crowd disperses slowly, muttering about onions and justice. A small boy throws a flower at the pig's feet. It eats the flower. As you wander away from the square, you can't help but think about the absurdity of the whole ordeal. And yet, somehow, it worked. In a world where laws were often brutal or non-existent, the animal trials offered a strange kind of order, a shared moment of control in a chaotic world, and they had one consistent outcome. People left the court with a story. A pig on trial is something no one forgets. You step onto a dirt path shaded by tall hedges. The village behind you. Somewhere nearby, someone's playing a lute out of tune. Somewhere else, a dog is barking at its own shadow. And ahead of you, new sign catches your eye. It says, "Hats prohibited on Sundays." You sigh. You stand before the sign, squinting up at the uneven handwriting. Hats prohibited on Sundays. It's nailed to a crooked post that leans slightly to the left, as if it too is confused by the law. Behind the sign is a quiet village with a stone chapel at its center, its bells already done ringing for the morning service. People are shuffling out, heads bowed not in reverence, but mostly to avoid eye contact with the town official stationed just outside the doors, who's inspecting foreheads. You are, of course, wearing a hat. A nice one. Slightly lopsided, probably full of straw, but stylish enough by 14th century standards. It keeps the sun off your nose and the flies out of your hair. Unfortunately, it also makes you a walking legal violation. None approaches with a basket of boiled turnips and gives you a pitying look. "You might want to remove that," she whispers, nodding at your hat. "The inspector's been in a mood since last Thursday." You tug it off and stuff it into your coat. Instant law-abiding citizen. In this sleepy town, nestled between two meandering streams and one extremely opinionated goose, the no hats on Sundays law is serious business. No one can quite remember when it started, or why. Some say it was to show humility before God. Others claim it was a fashion crackdown by a bishop who simply hated feathers. One local legend insists it was punishment for a nobleman who had a bad haircut under a very large cap during Easter. He was fined, shamed, and then naturally the town banned hats forevermore on Sundays to prevent such deception again. The town crier rings his bell twice, loudly. "If your head be covered, your soul be smothered," he calls out helpfully. You wonder if that rhymed better in Latin. Despite the absurdity, people follow the rule. Elderly men carry their hats in their hands. Women tuck bonnets into their baskets. And children, those who haven't already lost their hats to wind, and chickens wear little signs that read, "I obey." You make your way to a wooden bench. Near the chapel garden, bees buzz lazily around the herbs. The sun filters through fig leaves. It's all very peaceful, until you hear a slight scuffle. A teenager, no more than 16, is standing defiantly in front of the inspector. He's wearing a felt cap. It's purple and tall. The inspector, whose nose is somehow both pointy and damp, stares him down. "Young man, today is Sunday," he says in a voice so nasal it could open clams. "I'm aware," replies the boy coolly. "Then remove the hat." "I cannot." "Why not?" "It's affixed." Gasps ripple through the crowd. Affixed? He means it's tied on, or sewn, or glued, possibly with egg whites and determination. The inspector circles him like a suspicious chicken. "Is it a medical condition?" "No, sir." "Is it a religious garment?" "No, sir." "Is it full of secrets?" "Perhaps." There is a pause. The inspector taps his quill against his teeth and finally says, "A citation shall be written." And with great ceremony, he scribbles a warning on a strip of parchment, rolls it into a scroll the size of a carrot, and hands it to the boy, who bows mockingly and struts off, hat still intact. You'll be thinking about that hat for the rest of the day. Historians still debate the practicality of such hat laws. Some believe they were about modesty and unification. If no one wore hats, everyone looked equally ridiculous. Others argue it was about power, small as it may be, enforcing something silly just to show who could. There are records from various parts of Europe, Florence, York, Paris, showing that headwear laws were occasionally enforced with actual penalties, small fines, public shaming, or forced removal, often performed with suspicious enthusiasm by town guards. And yet, despite all the restrictions, people still found ways to be fashionable. They'd stuff their hats in their sleeves, attach small feathers to hairpins, or just wear extremely tall hairstyles and pretend it was all natural. You look around and realize most villagers are now bareheaded, their expressions a mix of boredom and vague fear. Even the goose seems cautious, waddling with an air of submission. A man walks by selling legal Sunday scarves, which are just hats rebranded as something holier. He winks as he passes you. You continue down the lane, through a stretch of hedges, your hat carefully concealed like contraband. The trees arch overhead, rustling in the breeze like gossiping monks. You hear the faint sound of splashing ahead, and pick up the scent of lavender soap. You raise an eyebrow. Someone is bathing, which, if the rumors are true, might be even more illegal than wearing a hat. You sigh again. This is going to be another long day. The path winds gently toward the sound of water. You brush past a clump of overgrown herbs, some mint, a bit of wild garlic, and something aggressively fuzzy that might be medicine or possibly just moss with delusions of grandeur. Ahead, nestled between two old willow trees, is a wooden tub. Inside it, a man, naked as the day he was born, whistling softly, surrounded by a suspicious number of flower petals. To his credit, he looks like he's trying to enjoy himself. There's a bar of soap clinging to one end of the tub, like it's afraid of commitment, and a small towel draped modestly over a nearby rock. The man sees you and waves cheerfully. Lovely weather for a soak, eh? You wave back hesitantly and look around for a constable. Because here's the thing. In many parts of medieval Europe, bathing was not just frowned upon, it was practically criminal. Why? Well, blame a few things: bad plumbing, worse theology, and a deep cultural suspicion of nudity. Add to that the odd belief that washing opened your pores and made you vulnerable to disease, and suddenly, bathing looked like a health risk. By the late Middle Ages, public bathhouses had earned a rather unwholesome reputation. Many were shut down or heavily policed, not because they were dirty, ironically, but because they were sometimes too clean and suspiciously social. If you were seen entering one, people assumed you were either up to something scandalous or about to die of plague. People just don't understand the joy of warm water. The man in the tub sighs. They think it melts your morals. You raise a brow. Does it? Only if you had rosemary, he says, completely straight-faced. You step a little closer, careful not to trip over a bundle of drying socks pinned to a bush. Nearby, a tiny sign reads, "Use of tub is not a legal endorsement." You can't help but smile. This little bathing outlaw seems harmless enough. He even offers you a turn, though you politely decline. You haven't brought your crime towel. As you sit on a nearby stump, he begins recounting tales of bath-related troubles in towns. Not far from here, one man was fined for owning too many soaps. A woman had to pay penance for using lavender oil on a Tuesday. Another neighbor was exiled for building a sauna too close to a holy fig tree. And that's not even mentioning the royal bath inspectors. Yes, that was a thing in some cities, who walked around sniffing people to see if they smelled suspiciously clean. You can't make this stuff up. And yet, history did. Historians still debate the true extent of anti-bathing laws. Some claim they were more about regulating public behavior than hygiene itself. Others argue that the anti-wash sentiment was overblown, and that people actually did bathe just very, very quietly. Still, there's no denying that at various points, particularly during plague years, public baths were feared, monitored, and shut down. And private bathing? That was a bit like smuggling fine cheeses across a border, technically possible, generally frowned upon, and likely to result in strange questions. A bee buzzes past your ear, perhaps offended by your own ambiguous hygiene. You shift slightly, and notice the bather has now applied some sort of mud mask to his forehead. It's unclear whether it's for beauty, camouflage, or ritual purposes. You staying long? He asks, rubbing his shoulders with what appears to be a dried fish scale. I'm just passing through, you say. Following the strange laws. He nods sagely. Plenty more of those. Wait till you get to the bread inspectors. You thank him for his time and rise to your feet. As you leave, he calls out, tell no one you saw me, and if you do, tell them I was wearing trousers made of steam. You wave back and chuckle softly. The trail narrows again, leading you through a copse of apple trees. The branches sway overhead like sleepy arms. A few petals drift lazily to the ground. Somewhere nearby, you hear a bell, not a church bell, but something smaller, delicate, rhythmic. You round a corner and see it. A line of bakers standing in front of their shops, each one holding a loaf in outstretched hands like an offering. Standing before them is a man with a scale. He's wearing a cape made entirely of breadcrumbs. Naturally, looks like it's time to meet the bread law inspectors. The man with the breadcrumb cape is turning slowly in place, eyeing each baker with theatrical suspicion. His expression is one of grave importance, as though he's evaluating royal jewels instead of slightly lumpy loaves of rye. You take a few cautious steps closer, trying not to interrupt whatever ancient carbohydrate ceremony is unfolding here. One of the bakers clears his throat. Sir, this one's been weighed. It's proper. The inspector, if that's what we're calling him, does not look impressed. He sniffs the loaf, gently prods it with one finger, and then licks his thumb and presses it into the crust with a flourish. You wince. Hygiene is optional today, apparently. He finally pronounces, acceptable, barely, and moves to the next shop. You stand beside a boy who's munching a crust and watching the drama unfold like it's his favorite puppet show. What's going on here? You whisper. He doesn't look away from the loaf theater. There, checking for fake bread. Fake bread? The boy nods gravely. You know, air bread, hollow middles, too much crust, loaves that pretend to be bigger than they are. It's a real problem, and it was. In medieval Europe, bread laws were serious business. For much of the Middle Ages, especially in England, there existed something called the Assize of Bread, a law regulating the size, weight, and price of bread to protect the public from shady bakers. If a baker tried to pass off a loaf that was too light, or used cheap flour, or baked it to appear bigger than it actually was, they could face stiff penalties, fines, public shaming, even a stint in the pillory, with stale buns hurled by grannies. The bread inspector weighs another loaf on a scale that looks older than sin. It tips dramatically, a pea-sized stone placed on one side, then another. Finally, he scribbles something in a tiny, grease-stained ledger. He gave Old Man Giles 2 warnings last month. The boy adds cheerfully, 1 more, and he has to bake apology loaves for the whole village. What's an apology loaf? The boy grins. It's just regular bread, but shaped like a sorry face. You glance at the bakers. They're sweating, not from the ovens, but from sheer anxiety. One woman crosses herself. Another discreetly brushes a speck of flour off her apron and mouths a prayer. And this makes sense. Bread was life. If your baker cheated, you could starve or get sick. In some cities, they even had public breadstones where people could compare their loaves to the official size model. If yours was too small, straight to bread jail. Historians still argue over just how strict these inspections were. Some believe it was more symbolic, an occasional check-in to scare off greedy bakers. Others insist it was deeply enforced, especially during times of famine or when towns grew suspiciously gluten deficient. You watch as one young baker gets praised for her perfectly balanced oat loaf. The inspector breaks off a corner, tastes it with exaggerated ceremony, and miracle of miracles smiles. It's the only smile you'll see him give all day. As the crowd begins to disperse, the boy tugs on your sleeve. You want to try something weird? You raise an eyebrow. Come on, he says. There's a guy 2 streets over selling unlicensed muffins. You blink. That's a crime? Only if they're warm, he whispers, already darting off down the alley. You follow. Because of course, you do. Wouldn't you? Soon, you're crouched beside a crate with the cloth draped over it, and inside steaming, golden, fragrant are round little cakes that smell like nutmeg and mischief. An old man leans forward. 1 coin. But if anyone asks, I'm selling foot warmers. You exchange a copper, accept the muffin, and take a bite. It's warm, soft, and slightly spicy. Easily the most delicious illegal thing you've eaten all day. You lean against a wall and savor it, grateful that the bread police have not yet expanded to muffin control in full force. Across the alley, a rooster crows indignantly at a sack of barley. A cat slinks by with a tiny roll in its mouth. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rings, not for danger, just the changing of the watch. You're full of warm muffin, slightly flour dusted, and still wondering what a loaf shaped like a sorry face might look like. Time to keep moving. The sun is beginning to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows that stretch like sleepy limbs across the cobbled street. You walk on, the path turning toward a row of houses where faint music is playing, and as you approach the nearest doorway, you spot it. A man being arrested for playing his flute too close to a cheese merchant. Of course, looks like it's time to learn about medieval noise laws. The flute in question is a bit off-key, but not offensively so. The man playing it is perched on a small stool, one leg swinging lazily as he pipes out a slow, twinkling tune that sounds vaguely like a lullaby. If that lullaby had a hangover, behind him, however, stands a very unamused cheese merchant with arms crossed and brows knitted so tightly they might need their own license. This is a quiet street, she huffs. It's a cheese-respecting street. The flutist stops playing long enough to wave his hands dramatically. I was hired to bring joy. You brought rats. That seems unfair, though to be honest, you did see a small parade of mice dancing behind a wine barrel earlier. A constable soon arrives with all the stern ceremony of someone who takes cheese tranquility very seriously. He carries a scroll longer than his own beard and begins reading from it as if preparing for a one-man play. By the third clause, you realize what you're witnessing. The enforcement of a medieval noise ordinance. Yes, they had those. Quite a few, actually. Medieval towns may not have had traffic lights or apartment intercoms, but they did have rules against excessive street music, loud hammering after curfew, and even singing in certain alleys. In some regions, you could be fined for playing bagpipes on a Tuesday, especially near holy sites, cheese vendors, or nervous goats. One French town had a law that forbade unpleasant humming within 100 paces of a convent. Another fined residents for window drumming, which was just people tapping to summon friends, an early and extremely annoying version of a doorbell. Why can't I play? The flutist protests as the constable unrolls yet another section of parchment. You're in a dairy district, the merchant snaps. This is sacred Kurd territory. A few villagers nod in agreement. One even waves a chunk of brie for emphasis. You lean over to a young man eating something wrapped in fig leaves. Is this real? He shrugs. I once saw a guy get kicked out of town for whistling too enthusiastically near a bakery. So, yes, very real. Historians today still puzzle over just how seriously these noise laws were enforced. Some argue they were mostly symbolic, meant to give towns a sense of order. Others point to court records that mention actual fines for disruptive banjoing and midnight dish clanking. There are even surviving complaints written by monks driven to madness by the sounds of spoon flute concerts echoing through stone corridors. As the constable lectures the flutist about sonic boundaries, you watch a pair of children tiptoe past with a set of bells tied to their shoes. They're clearly breaking some kind of ordinance, but no one seems brave enough to enforce it. Finally, the flutist is given a choice: move along or face the damp bench. You don't know what the damp bench is. You don't want to know. The flutist sighs, tucks his instrument into his cloak, and walks away humming a suspiciously loud tune. The cheese merchant claps politely and returns to rearranging her wheels. Of Gouda, you continue on, passing through narrow lanes where sound seems to change dramatically. One alley is dead silent, so quiet that even your footsteps sound rude. Another is filled with the strange and slightly off-tempo strumming of what might be a one-stringed lute. A man watches from a window with a "you better not report me" look. At the next turn, you find a shop with a hand-painted sign, officially licensed instruments and muffled drums. Inside, the shopkeeper grins as you enter. Looking to make noise legally? Just browsing. He gestures toward a shelf stacked with curious devices, soft-capped flutes, whisper harps, even a tambourine labeled, "Approved for Twilight. Use only. You can't be too careful," he says. Last week a guy got fined for rhythmic broom sweeping. Was he a musician? No, just very dramatic. You thank him, tip an imaginary hat, and return to the street, where the sun is now dipping below the tiled rooftops. A rooster coughs somewhere, unmusically. You pass a group of teens tapping spoons against bricks in suspicious syncopation. But even under all the rules and enforcement, there's music here, soft, careful, but persistent. A hum here, a whistle there. It's as though medieval life had to negotiate with sound, allowing just enough to keep spirits up without shaking the cheese. As the sky turns a deeper blue and the first stars begin to blink overhead, you follow a lantern-lit path toward the center of the village. There, in the middle of a small courtyard, stands a woman yelling at a goat. Not angrily, just insistently. You hear her say, "You are not qualified to represent the town in court." The goat bleats. Looks like you've arrived just in time to learn about medieval animal trials. The goat stares at the woman with the kind of blank defiance only a goat can muster, equal parts innocent and entirely guilty. He has a leaf sticking out of his mouth, one hoof on a broken fence post, and the kind of confident stance usually reserved for minor nobility or bread inspectors. "You ate the mayor's hat," the woman says slowly, as if the goat will suddenly understand human law through sheer repetition. The goat belches softly. You stand nearby, half hidden behind a cart of parsnips, not entirely sure if you're dreaming. But this is no play. A small crowd has gathered. There's a man taking notes, a child selling roasted chestnuts, and even a robed figure who might be a priest or possibly just a cold man in a curtain. Then someone announces, "The court shall now come to order." That's right. You are about to witness a medieval animal trial. These weren't jokes or village theatrics. Well, not only jokes. From the 13th to 18th centuries in parts of Europe, animals were sometimes tried in actual courts, with all the seriousness of human proceedings. Pigs, goats, dogs, even insects were occasionally put on trial for crimes ranging from crop damage to murderous behavior. And yes, they often had defense attorneys. Today's case, it seems, is one of property damage. The goat named, according to the court scroll, Sir Mutton of Mulberry has allegedly eaten the mayor's ceremonial hat and urinated on 2 official ribbons. The mayor arrives just in time to glare dramatically at the goat. This is the 3rd incident this month. He cries, "First, it was the banisters, then the banner, and now my bonnet." A boy in the crowd whispers, "It wasn't even a good hat." Still, the robed figure bangs a wooden spoon against a stool. The accused may not speak for himself unless he can do so without bleeding. The goat bleats. "Sustained," says the judge with a sigh. A man steps forward, a bearded fellow in a patched cloak, who introduces himself as the goat's representative. "Your Honor, my client has a long history of service to this village. He has provided companionship, lawn maintenance, and once warned a household of a chimney fire by falling into it." Someone in the back applauds politely. You suppress a smile. As ridiculous as this all seems, there's a kind of logic here. In a world where livestock and humans live side by side, sometimes with more goats than priests in a town, assigning legal personhood even to a goat wasn't entirely absurd. Medieval records show actual cases of pigs being sentenced to death for attacking children, horses being put on trial for kicking nobles, and even termites accused of property destruction in France. Some trials even included religious rituals, as if hoping to spiritually cleanse the offending creature. Of course, not all historians agree on how seriously these trials were taken. Some argue they were symbolic, a way to restore order after chaos. Others suggest they were legal theater meant to show a town's commitment to divine justice. Back at the trial, the prosecution is presenting its case. An angry list of chewed garments, overturned vegetable baskets, and one incident involving a startled bishop and a missing sandal. Meanwhile, the goat lies down and begins chewing his own tail. You lean toward a woman beside you, who's knitting something ominously shaped, like goat-sized mittens. Does the goat have a chance? She shrugs. Better than the duck last week. You decide not to ask. Eventually, after several arguments, a brief recess, and an unexpected musical interlude from a child with a whistle, the verdict is announced. Sir Mutton of Mulberry, for your crimes against haberdashery and ceremonial dignity, you are hereby sentenced to wear the hat of shame for 3 market days. The crowd cheers. The goat looks vaguely proud. Moments later, he's paraded through the village square wearing a tall, floppy hat with a feather and a tiny sign that reads, "I regret everything probably." You can't help but laugh. And the laughter is gentle, not mocking, just charmed. The air has cooled now, and torches are being lit along the narrow stone streets. A donkey walks past with a bundle of scrolls on its back. Someone's cooking lentils, and the scent mingles with the sweetness of baked apples. This world of absurd rules, talking trials, and goats in shame hats is more than just comedy, a reminder that even in history's darkest corners, people found ways to create meaning, order, and occasional silliness. You walk on, brushing a bit of hay from your sleeve, and find yourself drawn toward a soft sound, a bell ringing slowly, somewhere in the distance. You follow it through quiet alleys and over a small bridge, until you come to a worn stone arch where a man in a long robe stands beside a very serious-looking scale. He greets you with a yawn and says, "You're just in time. Tonight, we weigh time itself." You blink. "Is this another trial?" "No," he says. "This is the curfew watch." And just like that, you're about to learn why medieval people weren't supposed to go outside after dark. The bell rings again, one long, echoing note that seems to bounce off every windowpane and roof tile in the village. The sound settles in your chest like a reminder or a warning. The man in robes adjusts his hood and points to the sky. That was the second bell. Curfew's begun. You look up. The sun has vanished completely now, leaving behind a canvas of deep navy blue. A few stars have blinked to life, but there's still a faint shimmer at the horizon, as though the day hasn't fully signed off yet. Time to go home? You ask. He nods solemnly. Time to vanish. By order of the town. Welcome to curfew culture, medieval style. The man with the scale turns out to be the town's official Nocturnus Bellarius, or bell warden, though you suspect he made that up to feel more important. His job? Ring the curfew bell, make sure everyone gets indoors, and keep track of anything or anyone unusual out past dark. It's not just superstition, he says as he leads you down a lane now lit only by torch sconces and the occasional flickering lantern. Nightfall changes the rules. In medieval Europe, especially in towns and cities, curfews were taken seriously. As evening approached, a bell was rung usually from the main church tower or town hall signaling that fires should be dampened, doors shut, and streets cleared. The term curfew itself comes from the Old French couvre-feu, meaning cover the fire. It was quite literal. People were required to put out hearth flames to prevent nighttime blazes. Open flames plus wood-beamed homes made for toasty disasters. But over time, the curfew evolved into a broader social boundary. By the second bell, you were supposed to be indoors. By the third, only the desperate, the criminal, or the very confused remained. Tonight, apparently, you are the very confused. As you walk with the bell warden, he points out subtle clues. A candle in an upper window, quickly snuffed. A locked bakery door with flurry handprints. A pair of shoes abandoned under a bench, perhaps by someone in a rush to get inside. People think danger came from the outside, he says. But in the dark, even good people turn strange. You nod slowly. The air feels different now, heavier, like the village has pulled a blanket over itself. So, what happens if someone doesn't obey curfew? He sighs and holds up a scroll covered in ink smudges. Fines, mostly. Occasionally a night in the stocks. Once we had a guy sentenced to sweeping the square while wearing bells on his knees. You glance around. Are there people who just ignore it? Oh yes. Candle smugglers, bread thieves, teenagers. He pauses. The bread thieves were teenagers, actually. In some towns, curfew was strictly enforced by night watchman volunteers or hired guards who patrolled the streets with lanterns and long sticks. They'd call out the hour, check alleyways, and sometimes question anyone still outdoors. Some even had little jingles they sang, like gloomy bedtime lullabies for grown-ups. 10 of the clock and all is well. Go cover your fire. Go ring your bell. Tonight, however, there's only silence. The village is tucking itself in door by door, shutter by shutter. Of course, the bell warden mutters. Not everyone likes being told when to go to bed. You hear a sudden rustle and spin around just in time to see a figure dart across the street. He's carrying a ladder and wearing what looks like a cabbage on his head. The bell warden doesn't even blink. That's Fergus. He thinks curfew doesn't apply if you wear a vegetable. You watch the man vanish into the shadows like a well-practiced raccoon. Does it work? You asked. Strangely, yes. Not everyone was so lucky. Some medieval towns recorded nightly arrests of wandering souls, and certain places, even, instituted a kind of passport system, written permission to be out after dark. If you were caught without one, you risked everything, from fines to imprisonment to, in very unlucky cases, being mistaken for a witch. Sometimes, the warden says, we'd find people hiding in barrels, or pretending to be statues. One man disguised himself as a cow for a full week. You raise an eyebrow. Was it effective? No, but it was committed. You pass a watch post where a man with a heavy coat and a long stick nods at you. A bronze badge glints on his chest. Town Whisperer, apparently the local title for a night guard. He salutes with a sleepy yawn. No fiddling, no fiddling. He says vaguely, you're not sure what that means, but you promise not to fiddle. Historians still debate how uniformly curfews were enforced. Some towns were strict, others more relaxed. In wealthier districts, curfew might have been seen as, beneath certain families, something for peasants and pickpockets. But in many places, especially where fire risk or crime was high, it was treated like sacred routine. Eventually, you reach the village edge, where the torchlight thins and the woods begin. Don't go beyond the tree line, the bell warden warns. That's where the night belongs to the forest. You take his advice and turn back. Following the winding path toward the inn, lanterns now flicker from a few upper windows, like sleepy eyes half closed. The whole town is quieter now, more than quiet. It still.it feels like you've stepped into a lullaby.asu near the square. You hear a small chime, the final bell of the evening, and just like that, you've made it through curfew. But before you reach the inn door, a strange figure hurries past you. Hunched and wrapped in a patched cloak, you catch a glimpse of tools peeking out from under the fabric: brushes, powders, vials. A whisper follows in his wake. To the apothecary, there's a chicken who might be cursed. And suddenly, you're about to discover how medieval people handled medical mysteries, magical illnesses, and the fine line between healing and hexes. The apothecary's shop looks like it's trying not to be noticed. It's tucked between two larger buildings, one that smells like old books, and another that smells like older cheese, and the sign above the door is so faded, you're not entirely sure it says anything anymore. It might just be ancient smear. Still, the door creaks open when you knock, and a soft bell chimes from somewhere deep inside. Not the curfew bell, this one is gentler, like a spoon tapping porcelain. You step in cautiously, and at first, you think you've wandered into a closet. Shelves are crammed with glass bottles, dusty jars, feathered quills, and things in string-tied pouches that definitely move when you look at them too long. The air smells of dried lavender, vinegar, and a suspicious whiff of roasted onion. A voice calls out from the back. One moment. Just settling a disagreement with the frog, you hear a plop, followed by a satisfied ribbit. A moment later, a short, weary man appears, his beard flecked with herbs and possibly breadcrumbs. His cloak is more patch than fabric, and he walks with the confident shuffle of someone who knows the exact boiling point of a pigeon's spleen. "Welcome," he says, bowing with a flourish. "I'm Gaspard. Village apothecary, midnight healer, occasional exorcist, and once briefly a juggler." He eyes you. You don't look cursed, but you've got the posture of someone curious about curses. You smile politely and explain that you've just followed someone in here. Yes. He nods. The chicken man. He thinks his hen is haunted. Frankly, she just has hiccups. But superstition pays better than common sense. You follow him deeper into the shop, where you notice a chart labeled, "How to Tell If Your Soup is Magical," and a shelf entirely devoted to toads, loose and otherwise. It's here, among the clinking glass and faint smell of honeyed mold, that you begin to understand how medieval people dealt with health and what they thought caused illness in the first place. Spoiler: it wasn't germs. Instead, many believed in the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, a quartet of bodily fluids that supposedly governed everything from your mood to your digestive habits. Too much black bile, you're melancholy. Too much yellow bile, angry and possibly full of bees. Everything's about balance, Gaspard explains, pouring something fizzy into a cracked mug. A patient coughs blood, leech them. A child's skin turns green, must be the phlegm rising. Or spinach poisoning. You ask how he tells the difference. He winks. Smell. Treatments ranged from logical herbal teas, warm compresses to absolutely bonkers, burning feathers under the bed to chase out demons, feeding patients crushed emeralds, or sticking a worm in someone's ear to rebalance the cranial tides. And don't forget, he says, stirring a bowl of what might be mint or motor oil. Some people just blamed elves, a lesser-known fact. Medieval folks sometimes believed in elf shot, a mysterious, stabbing pain attributed to invisible elven arrows. The cure? Whisper threats to the wind, drink something mossy, and promise not to whistle at night. Not everything was superstition, though. Gaspard shows you a surprisingly advanced shelf of tinctures: willow bark for pain and early aspirin, foxglove for heart troubles, even honey poultices for wounds. Medieval medicine wasn't just nonsense. It was a patchwork of trial, error, and surprisingly observant improvisation. Still, some things made it complicated, like urine charts. These were actual diagrams showing different shades of pee and what they meant. Golden, good; red, bad; blue, witchcraft. And then, Gaspard says dramatically, there were the magical diseases. He pulls out a book larger than your torso, opens it to a sketch of a man sneezing flames, and taps it proudly. This one's called hell breath. Not contagious, just dramatic. You're about to ask about treatments when someone bursts into the shop, cradling a chicken like it's a Faber's egg. She's clucking in Latin. The woman yells. Gaspard sighs. No, she's just been near the monastery again. He disappears into a back room, murmuring something about rosemary and holy water. As you wait, you glance around. There's a stuffed squirrel on one shelf with a tiny scroll in its paw. Another corner holds what might be a wearable onion mask. Everywhere you look, there's evidence of a world that mixed real medicine with myth, faith, and a dash of desperate creativity. Historians still argue about how useful apothecaries were. Some see them as early pharmacists, lifesavers in woolen cloaks. Others think they were just the middlemen between folklore and fumbling hope. Outside, the curfew. Silence continues, and you realize how strange and lovely it is to be in a place where someone can treat hiccups with a spell and diagnose headaches using pigeon bones. You thank Gaspard, who hands you a vial of something green, just in case, and head back into the night. It's cooler now. The stars are thick overhead, and the wind carries the faint sound of laughter from a nearby inn. As you pass under a lantern, you catch sight of a poster nailed to the wall. Wanted. Scribe with neat handwriting and excellent bladder control. Apply at the Monastery of Regrettable Inks. And just like that, your next stop appears, because tonight, you're going to spend some time with the people who wrote all this stuff down. It's time to meet the medieval scribes. You awake to the slow toll of morning bells and the unmistakable scent of boiled cabbage. Your legs are stiff from yesterday's wandering, and your back complains mildly about sleeping under a sign that may or may not have been enchanted. But the good news is, you're still alive, still technically upright, and someone's handing out bread at the edge of the square. You follow the scent of flour and faint smoke until you reach the communal oven. A boy with soot on his nose and crumbs on his shirt offers you a misshapen roll. It's warm, soft, and slightly chewy, like it once had ambitions of becoming a pretzel, but gave up halfway through. This, it turns out, is the local baker's contribution to civic peace. Free-ish bread once a week, made from leftover dough and goodwill. You thank the boy and wander into the narrow lane behind the oven, where your next curiosity is waiting. It's market day, not the big, shiny fair where knights joust, and someone always ends up in a pino. This is the local weekday market, the kind where everyone already knows everyone else's goat by name. Stalls stretch along the muddy path like patchwork, each one hawking something marginally useful or mysteriously lumpy. There's a cheese seller with a wheel so old it has a first name, a potter offering cups that wobble like nervous squirrels, and a woman yelling enthusiastically about medicinal turnips. But the real treasure isn't the goods. It's the rules, or rather, the absurdly specific laws that govern every sneeze and sale in this tiny patch of civilization. You pause to admire a basket of apples, and the vendor glares. No sniffing. Unless you're buying, she snaps. You blink. That's a law. Third bell of the summer quarter. Post missed, she says flatly. Look it up. And so begins your deep dive into the strange, strangely serious world of market regulations. Medieval markets were tightly controlled spaces, not just to protect buyers from being scammed, but to prevent total economic chaos. This was, after all, a world where money could be measured in pebbles, sheep, or extremely passive-aggressive IOUs. First up, weights and measures. Every vendor is required to use standardized weights, issued by the town's bailiff. These are carefully inspected and often chained to the stalls so no one accidentally replaces them with hollowed-out versions filled with goose feathers. You watch a fishmonger test a scale using a lump of lead that looks suspiciously like a petrified sausage. He nods solemnly. Still accurate. Then there's the issue of quality control. A town official, usually someone who failed out of poetry school, patrols the market with a wooden staff and a notebook. His job? To taste, poke, and occasionally sniff items for sale to ensure they're not fraudulent. You witness one such inspection. A loaf of bread is sliced. A cheese is jiggled. A jug of ale is sampled with such enthusiasm you wonder if he's inspecting or just very committed to his work. He passes a bucket of eels, frowns, and writes something in his ledger. Too slippery. He mutters. Then, there are price limits. In some towns, medieval authorities fixed prices for basic goods to prevent sellers from exploiting the poor. If you sold your cabbage for too much, you could be fined, pilloried, or for repeat offenders forced to eat your own merchandise cold. You pass a spice merchant mid-argument with a nun over the cost of cumin. It ends with both of them dramatically crossing their arms and turning away at the same time. But perhaps the oddest regulations are the moral ones. Certain markets ban items on religious days. No meat on Fridays. No eggs during Lent. No laughter on St. Livid's Day. You don't ask. Some stalls aren't allowed to shout, ring bells, or sing songs that might tempt the easily distractible. A law posted near the well reads, no swearing near sausages. No juggling with blessed bread. No selling fake relics unless labeled as such. It's refreshing, honestly. And then there's the cheese tax. Yes, cheese tax. Certain towns required vendors to pay a fee, sometimes in literal cheese, in order to sell dairy goods. It was called the wheel duty, or milk tithing, and it ensured that even monks got their fair share of brie. You approach a stand stacked with soft, gooey rounds of mystery cheese. The merchant grins. Today's sample, St. Winifred's Soft, smells like thunder, tastes like angels. You take a bite. It tastes like salted silk. The merchant winks. 2 pence, or a good story. You offer a tale about a haunted chicken and a man who sneezed fire. Deal. Historians still debate how strictly these laws were enforced. Some think they were just polite suggestions. Others point to municipal records filled with surprisingly detailed punishments, like the time a fish vendor was sentenced to a week of public splashing for lying about the age of his trout. But what's certain is that these tiny laws helped medieval communities function. They created order where chaos could easily bloom. They gave everyone from the cabbage farmer to the pickle seller a shared script to follow, even if that script sometimes included instructions like, no haggling while dancing, or do not touch the gingerbread until the bell tolls twice. As the sun climbs higher, the market begins to quiet. You wander past empty stalls, the smell of sweet onions still hanging in the air. A boy runs past with a basket of quills. A woman laughs as she ties up her donkey. And somewhere in the distance, you hear the gentle clatter of parchment, because not far from here, someone is writing all this down. The laws, the loopholes, the jellyfish-shaped letters that spell out society. Your next stop? A small, windowless chamber where the ink is sacred, the candles are stubby, and the biggest scandal is a smudged vowel. Time to visit the scribes. The scribe's workshop doesn't look like much from the outside, just a plain wooden door with a scroll nailed to it, bearing a polite threat. No entrance without clean hands or good intentions. You check your fingers, dust off some lingering cheese crumbs, and step inside. Immediately, you're hit with a wall of scents, wax, ink, old parchment, and the faintest trace of something smoky, maybe from an overworked quill or a disgruntled candle. The room is hushed, the way libraries pretend to be. 3 long desks line the walls, each holding stacks of vellum, wooden ink pots, sharpened goose feathers, and scroll weights shaped like animals wearing tiny hats. There's no sound except the scratch, splotch of quills in motion. A scribe looks up and blinks at you slowly, like a sleepy owl caught mid-dream. Oh, he says, a visitor. He gestures for you to sit on a small stool that squeaks like it hasn't been acknowledged in years. You oblige, careful not to bump the nearest stack of parchment, which appears to be held together with a single prayer. I'm Alaric, the man offers, keeper of records, tracker of town cheese taxes, and apprentice to Master Scribe Thaddeus, who is currently arguing with the candle. Sure enough, a grumpy older man is muttering in the corner, waving a stub of beeswax over a stubborn manuscript as though threatening it with fire will fix his spelling errors. You lean in, curious. What do you all do here? Alaric smiles in a way that's equal parts pride and ink stains. We keep the memory of the town, the laws, the births, the cheese trades, the insult fines, everything someone might someday care about or pretend to. He gestures toward a massive leather-bound ledger. That one holds a full list of band names for pigs. You glance over. Sure enough, no more than 3 pigs named Henry. No pigs named Doom. Scribes were the invisible glue of medieval society, responsible for writing, copying, and sometimes embellishing the texts that kept communities functioning. They handled everything from royal decrees to angry neighbor complaints, and did it all by hand, one letter at a time. The tools of the trade were simple but sacred. The quill, often from a goose, swan, or occasionally a fancy raven, was trimmed to a sharp point, and retrimmed constantly as it dulled. Ink was brewed from oak galls, iron salts, and secrets. And parchment? It was usually made from animal skins, stretched and scraped until smooth. You run your fingers over a sheet. It's soft but firm, like a particularly well-disciplined slice of toast. Alaric shows you how he mixes his ink. A few drops of vinegar, some soot, and the occasional whisper to Saint Catherine, patron of scribes and those who accidentally spill things. You ask about mistakes. Ah, he says, holding up a blotchy sheet with a sheepish grin. That's what scrap parchment is for. If an error was small, it might be scratched off with a knife. If large, the page might be repurposed, covered with gesso, or turned into a grocery list for monks. You spot one document with faint outlines beneath the main text, ghost words, echoing beneath the surface. Palimpsests, they're called. Rewritten parchments, the medieval version of a deleted tweet. Historians still puzzle over some of these, trying to uncover what secrets might have been wiped away to make room for something more important. You ask about juicy secrets, and Alaric lights up. Oh yes, we see it all. There was a priest who tried to marry a goose, a noble who declared war on a bakery, and last month, someone submitted a formal complaint that their neighbor's donkey looked at them in a threatening tone. He flips to another volume and reads aloud. In the year of the rolling fog, one Master Wilfrid was fined 1 silver groat for labeling his jam jars elixir of kingship without municipal permission. You grin. Did it work? Only on Wednesdays. Scribes weren't just recorders. They were storytellers, editors, and sometimes quiet rebels. Many slipped personal notes or drawings into margins, tiny dragons, mischievous monkeys, or grumpy caricatures of their bosses. One particularly famous manuscript includes a detailed doodle of a knight fighting a giant snail. No one knows why. Historians still wonder if it was a metaphor, an inside joke, or just a scribe with a very boring afternoon. You spot something similar here, a miniature drawing of a cat riding a duck into battle. It's labeled Duke Fluffsworth. Alaric shrugs. Creative stress relief. You marvel at the sheer patience it must take to copy a legal charter or religious text, letter by perfect letter, without caffeine or Ctrl+Z. Did people appreciate scribes back then? You ask. Alaric ponders. Only when we stopped writing long enough for them to notice we existed. As the candle burns low, Master Thaddeus approaches. He hands you a freshly written sheet. You've been entered into the book of guests, he says, and possibly the book of suspects. We'll decide later. You smile and bow slightly. Thank you for everything. Alaric waves you out the door, pausing only to hand you a small slip of parchment. It reads, 1 free sausage, redeemable only on full moons during goat season. You fold it and tuck it away, just in case. Outside, the market has emptied. The light is slanting golden over the rooftops, and the village has slipped into that soft pause between day and evening. Tomorrow, you'll explore the noble estate where powdered wigs, etiquette manuals, and passive-aggressive servants await. But tonight, your fingers are still ink-stained, and your thoughts drift in tiny, careful letters. There's a story on every scroll. And maybe, just maybe, now there's one with your name on it too. You wake up to a soft clatter, not the usual clanging of a busy street or the rhythmic squelch of someone losing a boot to medieval mud. No, this is more refined, polished, perhaps even powdered. You're no longer in the town square or the scribes' candlelit cave. You're at the outer gates of a noble estate where lawns are suspiciously manicured, hedges are trimmed into theological metaphors, and even the peacocks walk like they have inherited land rights. A footman approaches. His coat is too clean, his expression too blank, and he's clearly judging your shoes. You're expected, he says, though you're almost sure you aren't. He leads you through a gravel path that crunches like judgment under your feet. Beyond it, the manor rises in graceful awkwardness, half fortress, half furniture catalog. Tapestries flap lightly in the upper windows, and a carved unicorn above the door looks like it regrets everything. You enter. Instantly, you are swallowed by rules. There are rules for walking, rules for bowing, rules for how to accept a bowl of soup without insulting anyone's grandmother, and they are all written, of course, in the Book of Households, an actual leather-bound tome kept on a lectern near the entrance like some sacred IKEA manual. An attendant whispers to you, no elbows on the windowsills, no humming during embroidery, no hats that resemble birds. Unless it's Thursday, you nod solemnly, trying to blend in. The manor's interior is a museum of noble intent. Portraits of ancestors who all appear to be frowning at something just out of frame, candlesticks shaped like saints, and more curtains than there are windows. You're shown to the parlor, where Lady Genevieve of something or other greets you with the faintest curtsy. She offers you a seat that seems designed to punish spines and begins explaining the customs of the gentry. Nobility in medieval Europe operated under a labyrinth of protocols so delicate, even blinking could cause offense. Sit only when I sit, Genevieve says, and sip only after I sip. And if the dog growls at you, ignore it, he only respects barons. The sumptuary laws governed what nobles could wear: lace from here, velvet from there, buttons made of morally acceptable metals, a commoner wearing silk, unforgivable, a knight in fur, acceptable, but only if the animal wasn't known to bite royals. Genevieve gestures to her sleeve, embroidered with golden bees. See, authorized by my cousin's marriage to a beekeeper. Technically, dining is another performance altogether. Forks exist here, rare, delicate, and used only on vegetables that don't make eye contact. Meat is served in elaborate forms, pies that resemble animals, birds that have been unplucked and redressed after cooking, and stews that are just excuses to use the word mirepoix. A servant brings you a spoon. It's decorative. Genevieve warns, use it, and we'll have to duel. You decide to just smile and chew thoughtfully on a piece of something probably historical. Then come the games. In the evening, nobles play chess, but not the fast kind. This is slow chess, where each move is preceded by 5 minutes of strategic glaring. Other favorites include blindfolded poetry recitation, scandal-themed charades, and the annual Guess Whose Land This Is contest, which always ends in quiet weeping. You're invited to join a round of Who Poisoned the Marzipan, a polite whodunit where everyone accuses each other while complimenting their embroidery. I believe it was Lord Ambrose, one noblewoman purrs, because he once looked at a lemon with disdain. It's not just silliness. These customs are about status, control, and making sure no one too new rises too fast. The rules are like soft walls, unseen, but very real. Historians still debate whether these rituals were sincerely followed or just performance. Some argue that noble life was full of pretense. Others believe it was simply the medieval version of social media, curated, coded, and quietly exhausting. You find a quiet alcove with a tapestry showing Saint Basil arguing with a snail. It's peaceful here, far from the dinner drama and the subtle war over who gets the warm chair. A steward appears. He hands you a small scroll. It's your invitation to tomorrow's hunt. Not the dangerous kind, just the performative kind, where nobles ride around looking elegant, and someone quietly releases a rabbit from a sack to make it feel official. You thank him and decide it's time for a breath of non-perfumed air. Outside, the sky is fading into lavender. The manor glows behind you, windows lit like watchful eyes. Somewhere, Genevieve is probably arranging her gloves in order of perceived importance. You walk toward the stables, past the garden where statues of saints peek out from rose bushes. The air is cooler now, quieter. Tomorrow, you'll witness courtship dances, mistaken identities, and a love letter delivery system involving falcons. But tonight, as you lean against a carved column and watch fireflies rise over the lawn, you realize something curious. For all their polish and pageantry, these nobles are just as chaotic as the rest of medieval society, only with better tableware. Morning arrives with the smell of dew, and just the faintest hint of over-perfumed noblemen wafting down from the upper floors. You're back at the manor. Today is courtship day, though no one says it aloud. They pretend it's just a gathering, or a picnic in the orchard, but everyone knows what's at stake. Glances exchanged behind fans, handkerchiefs accidentally on purpose dropped, and highly choreographed, spontaneous poetry. The noble courtship ritual is less about love and more about status ballet, an endless exchange of subtle gestures, riddles, family background checks, and whether or not one can dance without stepping on the bishop's niece. Lady Genevieve greets you again. this time with a slightly raised eyebrow and a hat shaped like a swan in repose. "Welcome to the orchard," she says, "where feelings are aired and none of them are sincere." You're handed a small card with elaborate calligraphy that reads, "Please do not duel before the pears are served." The day begins with games meant to encourage mingling without actual interaction. Archery, for example, where competitors shoot arrows and then loudly compliment each other's wrists. Then lawn poetry. One person stands on a barrel and declares feelings using metaphors involving clouds, berries, or occasionally spoon injuries. A knight clears his throat and declares, "Thy gaze pierces me like soup to hot. I burn, yet dare not spit thee out." Polite applause follows. You, as a guest of no known title or lineage, are quickly labeled mysterious stranger, a role both suspicious and deeply fashionable. A young lady named Elspeth begins circling you like a wary cat. She's wearing a dress the size of a small boat and holds a fan with what appears to be an entire family motto stitched into the lace. She asks your name. You give her one that sounds vaguely landed, Baron von possibly, and she nods solemnly, noting it in her mental registry. Meanwhile, musicians play something called a galliard of possible affection, and couples are herded onto the dancing lawn by a man with a bell and a frown. You're pulled into a dance before you can protest. The steps are dizzying. 4 hops, a twirl, a small bow to the left, and then a moment where you both pretend you don't care if you never see each other again. Courtship in the Middle Ages was often formal, strategic, and slow. Nobles couldn't marry just anyone. Families were consulted. Fortunes were calculated. Teeth were quietly inspected. Sometimes, marriages were arranged when the parties involved were still learning how to walk, and those were the easy ones. For those who got to choose or appeared to choose, every interaction was loaded with meaning. A glance could imply affection. A misplaced compliment could cause scandal. A poorly chosen flower could doom your entire bloodline. Elspeth offers you a gift, a sprig of rosemary tied with red ribbon. It means memory, she whispers, or indigestion, depending on who you ask. You thank her and offer, in return, a joke about your fictional estate sinking slowly into a bog. She laughs too hard, scandalously hard. People turn to look. Genevieve raises an eyebrow so sharply could slice ham. Elspeth is quickly escorted away by her chaperone, who mutters something about dangerously charming commoners. You retreat to the punch table. Nearby, a pair of noblemen debate whether an earl's daughter should be allowed to own books before marriage or only after. One of them insists that too much reading leads to romantic confusion and elbow injuries. You learn about love tokens, tiny offerings exchanged between hopeful suitors, carved combs, embroidered sleeves, or if you're particularly bold, a miniature of your own face drawn onto a walnut. Someone shows off a courtship chicken, a live bird wearing a ribbon, intended to deliver a proposal letter. The chicken escapes. Romance is delayed until someone retrieves it from under a hedge. Historians still wonder how many of these customs were widely followed and how many were isolated to particular regions or noble whims. Some letters between lovers survive sweet, clumsy, coated with affection. Others are stiff and practical. I have a cow and 2 rivers. Do you? As the sun lowers, the courtship picnic begins. Servants lay out a grand spread: candied almonds, roasted pigeon, and tiny pies shaped like hearts and regrettable decisions. You're seated next to someone named Sir Dandel, who introduces himself with, "I own 14 spoons and a banner shaped like envy." He spends 20 minutes explaining his coat of arms, a boar fighting a candle, while you focus on not spilling your mead. After the feast, a final event, the love letter lottery. Participants write anonymous notes and place them into a carved box. Later, A neutral party reads them aloud without names to allow for secret affections to bloom in plausible deniability. You listen as notes are drawn. To the one who stepped on my hem, I forgive you, and also, marry me. Your laugh reminds me of victorious bees. If I were a falcon, I'd fly only to your windowsill. You consider writing your own, but realize you've already caused enough ripple in the local romance pond. Dusk settles. Lanterns flicker on. Somewhere, a lute begins to strum what can only be described as the sound of a goat longing for companionship. As you leave the orchard, Elspeth catches your eye from across the lawn. She mouths something, could be, "Thank you," or, "Thy boots are alarming." You nod. A silent farewell. Tomorrow, you'll accompany the household to church, where sacred rituals meet very unsacred seating arrangements. But for now, the air is warm, your limbs pleasantly sore from dancing, and your mind heavy with lace and riddles. You may never be a noble, but for one strange, delightful afternoon, you danced like one and mostly avoided embarrassment. You awaken to the sound of bells, not ominous ones, but the kind that ring in a particular key of holiness and hang over. It's Sunday, and in the manner that means everyone becomes very temporarily concerned with the state of their souls, which, for nobility, often means dusting off their finest hats, looking vaguely remorseful, and loudly wondering if their rivals' sins are worse than theirs. Lady Genevieve glides past your chamber in a gown so starched it makes a breeze when she walks. She announces, not to anyone in particular, "Today, we worship and judge." You're handed a tunic. It smells faintly of lavender and dried goose. Church attendance is mandatory, of course, but how one attends is the true art. Genevieve explains it with a grin. One must look pious, but not poor. Humble, but not as if trying too hard. Don't outshine the priest, but do make sure he sees your hat. You ride in a procession to the local chapel, perched atop a mild hill and surrounded by yew trees that look like they're gossiping. The building is small but striking, with stained glass that tells biblical stories in oddly medieval fashion. Noah's Ark is shaped like a wine barrel, and one of the wise men is definitely holding a cheese wheel. Inside, the pews are strictly ranked. Nobles to the front, minor nobles just behind. Visiting strangers like you somewhere in the back, near a drafty wall, and an elderly widow who whispers everything she thinks. You sit. The service begins. The priest steps forward, Father Bertram, a man with the voice of thunder and the joints of an arthritic goose. He launches into a sermon about humility while eyeing Lord Ambrose's bejeweled boots. Occasionally, he pauses to let the organist catch up or to cough theatrically. You try to follow the sermon, but your eyes keep drifting to the ceiling beams, where pigeons nest and occasionally judge you from above. Across the aisle, a young couple is clearly communicating via eyebrow. Behind them, someone sneezes with divine force. The widow next to you leans over and whispers, "That's 3 sneezes this month." He's cursed. The medieval church experience is part ritual, part social theater. You stand, kneel, sit, repeat. You murmur responses. You don't dare sing unless you've been blessed with a voice that won't startle sheep. Then comes the public penance portion. One by one, those who've broken minor laws step forward to confess, not privately, but before the whole congregation. A young man confesses to borrowing a neighbor's chicken without emotional consent. A woman admits to having unseasonal thoughts about her gardener. Lord Ambrose, under his breath, mentions he may have overcharged someone for turnips. The priest nods sagely and assigns penance. A week of no ale, 3 public blessings, or, in one case, say 10 kind things about your wife before sunset. Historians note that church laws often blended religious doctrine with local politics. The clergy could influence everything from taxes to marriage disputes. and depending on the region, priests were either feared, adored, or mildly tolerated for their entertaining rants. Father Bertram concludes the service with a blessing that seems to be aimed mostly at his own aching back. Everyone mumbles, "Amen," it's a spell to escape, but the real show begins after the service. Outside the chapel, the congregation gathers for what Genevieve calls holy gossip. Here, reputations are made or broken over subtle nods, and the flavor of someone's offering bread. A widow passes around her biscuits. You're warned not to eat them unless you wish to fall in love and hallucinate owls. You listen as two nobles whisper about Elspeth's scandalous laugh yesterday. Another conversation includes the phrase, "He didn't even genuflect properly in front of the relic." You stroll toward the graveyard, a quiet space behind the church filled with crooked stones and ivy. Some of the oldest graves are marked with symbols, keys, shears, fish that hint at forgotten professions. Others are simply worn blank, names swallowed by time and rain. You pause before one stone, freshly carved. Here lies Sir Gawain, beloved of cheese and unbothered by logic. You smile. The sacred and the ridiculous were never far apart in medieval Europe. While the church held immense power dictating time, seasons, morality, it also existed alongside superstition, folk practices, and local traditions that made every village's version of Christianity slightly different. In some places, people believed saints could help find lost items. In others, it was customary to argue with statues if a prayer went unanswered. Pilgrimages were made not just for salvation, but also for the chance to buy trinkets, escape bad marriages, or experience the medieval equivalent of a long weekend away. You join the group returning to the manor. The afternoon passes in quiet reflection, embroidery, and a debate over whether sneezing during a hymn voids divine favor. Genevieve insists it does. Lord Ambrose says only if it's a dramatic sneeze. You retire to the library, which smells of dust and theological uncertainty. A cat naps on a missal. A candle flickers beside a book titled Saints Who Probably Didn't Exist, but Sound Cool. You flip through a page or two. By evening, the manor has returned to its normal rhythm. The sacred calm gives way to secular complaints. Someone's chair is missing, a pudding has gone mysteriously flat, and the dog has been spotted hoarding communion wafers. You head to your chamber, the soft echo of bells still in your ears. Tomorrow, you'll visit the market with the manor steward, where you'll encounter guild disputes, band dies, and one very aggressive cabbage vendor. But tonight, wrapped in linen and quiet, you breathe deeply. The chapel, the chants, the strange sacred theater, it's all behind you now. And if the pigeons above you begin cooing in a vaguely judgmental tone, just remember, in this world, even the birds have opinions. You wake to the sound of shouting, which is not immediately alarming because in medieval manors, shouting is how most things get done. Joyful shouting, angry shouting. Someone just saw a hedgehog shouting. Today, you've been asked voluntold, really to accompany the manor steward to the local market town. The steward, Master Baldwin, is already at the gate in a tunic the color of moss and a face that looks like it was carved out of impatience. "Try not to look like a burglar," he says, handing you a small pouch of coins and a large list written in crabby handwriting. You mount a cart pulled by a mule named Saint Agnes, who appears neither saintly nor ambitious. The journey is slow, and full of bumps that feel personal. Along the way, Baldwin gives you a quick rundown. Today's market is expected to be busy. There will be cloth merchants, butchers, bakers, apprentices who overcharge, spinsters who gossip, and probably at least one person trying to sell you a cure for wandering spleens. The market town comes into view around mid-morning, framed by a low stone wall and several homes with roofs that resemble collapsed cupcakes. A man at the gate shouts, "No fire breathers this week," and waves you through inside. The scene is a delightful disaster. Stalls line the streets, overflowing with everything from eels and barrels to buttons carved from bone. Someone walks by with a pig on a leash. A child yells, "My radishes are bewitched," and gets several sales. The air smells like fresh bread, aged cheese, onions, horses, and possibility. Baldwin vanishes with the efficiency of someone who's been doing this for decades. Leaving you to explore, you pass a woman selling dyes ban. In 3 counties, rich blues and purples too close to royal shades for comfort. She winks at you and whispers, "Don't tell the sheriff." You nod solemnly, as if this is a normal part of your Tuesday. Nearby, a man offers blessed spoons, guaranteed to ward off demons and indigestion. His pitch includes a demonstration involving soup and a dramatic fainting spell. It's unclear whether it's real, but the crowd claps anyway. You stop at the textile stall, where a young woman unrolls bolts of fabric and mutters about thread count and dowries. She sells you a length of rough wool and throws in a button shaped like honesty. In the meat section, things get livelier. A butcher with arms like hem hocks declares he's got the freshest mutton west of the river, which another butcher immediately disputes by throwing a sausage at his face. A small duel ensues using ladles. A priest blesses the meat mid-fight. Baldwin reappears to buy both cuts at a discount. The guild booths are the most official part of the market. There's a tent for the Weavers Guild, decorated with samples and stern warnings against unauthorized spinning. Another booth features the Cobblers Guild, who display shoes ranging from elegant slippers to something that looks like a leather potato. A dispute breaks out between 2 apprentices, both claiming their master invented the square-toed shoe. A crowd gathers. Wagers are placed. Someone starts chanting, "Toe math, toe math." Historians still debate how strictly guild rules were enforced, especially in rural markets. Some masters upheld regulations like sacred law, while others bent them for profit. Apprentices, caught in between, mostly tried to avoid public embarrassment and hot glue disasters. You help Baldwin settle a dispute over spoon taxation. Yes, that's real, and he rewards you with a tart from the pastry merchant who insists it's filled with seasonal mystery. You eat it. It's delicious and only slightly confusing. Nearby, a bard performs a short musical piece about a goose who fell in love with a knight. His lute has 1 string, and his sense of pitch is adventurous. Still, the children applaud, and someone throws a turnip in appreciation. You wander past the healer's lane, where remedies are sold alongside curses and wishful thinking. A woman offers you a poultice for aching knees. You tell her your knees are fine. She nods knowingly and says, "Wait, there's a scribe's booth too. He writes letters for those who can't." You overhear someone dictating a message to his cousin about a lost shoe, a found pig, and a woman named Marjorie who may or may not be haunting the pantry. As the day winds down, merchants start packing up. Leftover fish is sold at a discount, and the pie stall offers a final chant, "Last call for gooseberry or regret." You help Baldwin load the cart. He grunts his approval and tells you that only 3 people tried to cheat him this week, a personal best. On the way back, he even lets you drive the mule for a while, which is thrilling until St. Agnes walks directly into a bush out of spite. As the manor comes back into view, the cart bouncing rhythmically over stones, you feel oddly proud. Your clothes smell like 10 kinds of lunch. Your pouch is lighter. Your boots are dusty, and there's a dried plum in your pocket that you definitely didn't buy, but you've survived a medieval market day and even found joy in its noisy, chaotic rhythm. Tomorrow, you'll be helping with the harvest festival. There will be dancing. There will be ale. There will be competitive haystacking, but for now, the manor gates creak open. Baldwin mutters something that might be approval. You nod to St. Agnes, who blinks once like a mule philosopher, and as you head inside, pockets full of minor miracles, you already start wondering if you'll ever find another pie quite as strange or as perfect as that one filled with seasonal mystery. You're awakened before sunrise by an enthusiastic banging on a cooking pot. This, as it turns out, is the official manor alarm for Festival Day, in this case, the annual harvest celebration, a much-anticipated event filled with music, mild mischief, and at least one person accidentally setting something on fire in the name of tradition. Lady Genevieve appears in your doorway with the flower crown already half assembled and a slightly threatening smile. "Wake up, sleepy cabbage," she says. "It's a good day for dancing and regrettable wagers." You stretch, yawn, and blink into the pre-dawn light, which spills through the shutters like gold-dusted dust. The manor is already humming with activity. Servants dart past, carrying baskets of apples and squashes. A boy runs by, holding 3 eels and screaming. Someone in the corner is debating the ethics of dyeing the sheep for the parade. Your tunic is laid out for you festive green with an embroidered squirrel. You're assured this is flattering. You're not convinced. In the great hall, long tables are being prepared for the feast. The cook, who you now know only as Matilda the Unamused, is barking orders while stirring something in a cauldron that smells suspiciously like spiced turnips and triumph. Outside, the village is decorating itself. Garlands of dried wheat hang from doorways. Someone's drawn cheerful faces on several gourds. Children are piling hay into a suspiciously strategic shape that, later, will become the festival throne, traditionally awarded to whoever wins the "who can sit the stillest" while holding a goose contest. You help carry casks of cider to the village green, guided by Baldwin, who mutters, "They always say it's for the harvest gods, but it's really just to get Lord Ambrose to dance again." By mid-morning, a small parade forms. It includes one very confused goat in a ribboned bonnet, 3 girls dressed as various vegetables, a flute player who is definitely making up the melody, a man in a barrel who keeps shouting, "I'm the spirit of abundance." You're given a flag made of stitched together scraps and told to wave it like you mean it, but not so hard it flies off again. And then the games begin. There's sack racing, which becomes a display of athletic chasse-stack leaping, which is more dangerous than poetica tug-of-war, that ends with someone losing a shoe and gaining a story, and the infamous catch the greased pig competition, which historians still debate the cultural significance of, but everyone agrees is hilarious. You were roped into the judging panel for the most impressive turnip contest. The winner is a woman named Hilda, whose turnip has a bump vaguely shaped like the Virgin Mary. She's thrilled. The priest looks vaguely alarmed. By afternoon, the dancing starts. A fiddler begins playing something fast and whimsical. Pairs spin on the green. Even Baldwin is roped into a slow waltz with the village blacksmith, who dips him dramatically and winks. Genevieve grabs your hand and spins you into the circle. You do your best not to trip over your own festive squirrel. The villagers laugh, clap, cheer. Someone's cider barrel has burst, and children are trying to drink it using pieces of bread as cups. It's sticky, but innovative. At the edge of the festivities, the storyteller begins their annual tradition. They wear a robe patched with bits of old banners, and hold a carved staff topped with a wooden carrot. No one knows why, but no one questions it either. With a raspy voice and dramatic flair, they tell tales of old harvests, of crops that sang, of chickens that predicted the weather, and of a plague of dancing bees. Historians still wonder, the storyteller says, whether the bees were bewitched, bribed, or just really into music. People throw coins into their hat and apples at their feet. One child throws an onion. The storyteller bows. As sunset paints the sky in wine and honey, the feast begins. Long tables creak under the weight of roasted chickens, with herb trenchers filled with pottage and stewed root vegetables that seem to contain both fruit and a few surpresses wheels the size of small sheep and, of course, cider, flowing freely into mugs, and Mouthsniff proposes a toast to the harvest, the hearth, and the hope that no one fights over pudding this year. Everyone cheers. Even St. Agnes the mule gets a celebratory apple. She seems unimpressed, but accepts it with royal grace. Later in the evening, the bonfire is lit. Flames crackle upward as villagers gather around. There's singing, off-key, and joyful. Someone plays a drum with a spoon. The mood is soft, tipsy, and golden. You sit beside the fire, a little full, a little tired, your flower crown now askew, but still holding on. The stars blink into view. A few embers float upward, joining them for a moment before fading. It's hard to believe this joyful day came from such hard work, from planting and sweating and praying and chasing goats out of gardens. But that's the beauty of harvest time in medieval Europe. A moment to breathe, to laugh, to be absolutely ridiculous before winter's grip returns. And as the fire pops and crackles beside you, someone hands you a piece of berry tart and says, "Don't worry, the goose contest was postponed due to flapping." You smile, lean back, and let the night settle around you like a warm wool cloak. Tomorrow, the manor returns to its usual pace. But tonight is for dancing vegetables, victorious turnips, and stories that make no sense, but make everyone feel just a little more human. This morning, the manor is quieter than usual. That's not to say it's quiet. There's still the clatter of spoons, the bleating of a goat who wants breakfast now, and someone yelling about a missing left shoe. But compared to yesterday's chaos, it's practically meditative. You shuffle into the courtyard, still wrapped in a blanket and smelling faintly of berry tart and bonfire. The flower crown is gone. No one knows where. Some suspect it eloped with the turnip. Today, you're shadowing a group of itinerant justices, yes, real medieval court officials who've arrived at the manor to oversee local legal disputes. Think of them as a cross between traveling judges and pop-up referees in a game no one quite understands. Their arrival causes a small stir. These justices an old French word for circuit, ride into the village with an entourage of scribes, horses, and very official-looking cloaks. One of them carries a gavel carved from cherry wood. Another has a scroll longer than a picnic blanket and half as readable. "Put on something presentable," Baldwin mutters, "preferably without jam stains." You're handed a quill, a fresh scrap of parchment, and told to act as a junior assistant, mainly sitting quietly, observing, and not falling asleep during testimony. The makeshift court sets up in the manor's main hall, where benches creak and the air smells like ink, damp wool, and anxiety. One of the justices, Sir Reginald, who has the eyebrows of a wise owl and the patience of a damp wasp, calls the first case. The entire hall goes still. Even the goat outside seems to pause. The first charge? Accusation of unlawful bread stretching. Apparently, a local baker was caught adding mashed turnips to his loaves to increase size without increasing grain. He argues that turnips are just rustic flour. The justices are not impressed. Next, a boundary dispute between two farmers. They each claim a particular fig tree belongs on their side of the hedge. The fig tree, incidentally, is leaning sideways and producing no figs. Testimonies are delivered with dramatic flair, complete with flourishes, finger pointing, and at least one impromptu diagram drawn in spilled ale. Throughout the day, you witness a parade of humanity and confusion. A man accused of impersonating a tax collector. His defense: I never asked for money, only compliments. A woman who insists her neighbor cursed her cows. They've started mooing in Latin. A pig theft turned misunderstanding. The pig had wandered into a wedding feast and stayed for the cake. A dispute about song ownership. He stole my ballad about the haunted cheese wheel. One of your duties is to record the cases, though most of your notes look like unlawful spoon duel. Bald man insulted by goose slander. Evidence equals moldy cabbage equals. Between cases, the justices argue over how severely to punish small crimes. There are long debates about whether stealing a loaf of bread should result in a fine, public shaming, or a stern lecture about yeast. Historians still wonder how consistent these traveling courts really were. Some justices were harsh, others lenient. Some enforced the law, others enforced their mood. The result was a sort of legal patchwork quilt, stitched with quirks and contradictions. During a midday break, the scribes share their most ridiculous case stories. One recalls a chicken put on trial for laying an egg that resembled the king. Another tells of a fishmonger fined for selling sardines that spoke too sadly. You eat lunch with the junior clerk, who offers you part of a cold meat pie and half a joke about monks and pickles. The afternoon session includes a land ownership dispute involving a poorly drawn map, a forgotten marriage contract, and someone's uncle's debt from 27 years ago. Everyone nods solemnly. No one understands what's happening. Then comes the trial of the missing bucket. A noble accuses a peasant of stealing his best oak bucket. The peasant claims it was actually his bucket all along, but that it was temporarily borrowed by the noble's nephew, who lent it to the neighbor, who forgot where he put it. The bucket is eventually found being used to collect pears in the orchard. Everyone agrees it is a fine bucket. The case is dropped, but not before the bucket is held aloft and shown to the crowd, who applaud politely. As the day winds down, the justices prepare their departure documents. The lead scribe counts coins, seals scrolls, and mutters something about parchment shortages and goose feather inflation. Before leaving, Sir Reginald gathers the townsfolk and delivers a closing statement that includes the phrases, "Majesty of the law, respect for fig trees, and we'll be back unless we aren't." The villagers clap, a dog howls, someone sneezes. The justices ride off in a neat row, their horses stepping carefully around puddles and piglets. Back inside, Baldwin sighs and says, "Well, no one got flogged this time. That's a win." You hand over your parchment, filled with strange cases, scribbled questions, and what may be a drawing of the haunted cheese wheel ballad. As night falls, you sit by the kitchen hearth, a cup of warm broth in your hands, and reflect on the medieval justice system. It was messy, performative, deeply flawed, and somehow it sort of worked. Justice, you think, might not always be blind, but in the Middle Ages, it was occasionally deaf, fond of pickles, and carried in on horseback. The next morning arrives with a gentle drizzle and the soft squelch of someone slipping in the mud outside. You're woken not by roosters or banging pots, but by the manor steward, a serious man named Edric, who always looks like he just smelled a bad onion but is too polite to mention it. "Up," he says, holding out a small wax tablet and a stylus. "It's inventory day." You groan quietly, roll out of bed, and begin your mental preparations for one of the least glamorous yet somehow deeply revealing days of medieval life. Tallying everything in the estate. This isn't just counting sacks of barley, it's a full, painstaking audit of food stores, tools, clothing, animals, candles, cart wheels, roof slates, spoons, yes, spoons, and anything else that might be pilfered, borrowed, broken, or simply gone missing under mysterious medieval circumstances. The Steward hands you the official ledger, which is mostly faded ink, suspicious abbreviations, and one very detailed drawing of a goat wearing spectacles. You do not ask. Your job is to shadow Edric as he visits every room, barn, and shed to record what's here, what's missing, and what's mysteriously double. First stop. The granary. It smells like hay, mouse, and a faint hint of panic. Sacks of barley are stacked in uneven pyramids. Edric taps each with a stick and mutters, looks underfilled. You note, possibly 3 sacks short, or one greedy squirrel. Next, the kitchen cellar. Here, you count 14 wheels of cheese, 3 with bite marks, possibly human. 8 salted hams hanging from rafters, 2 barrels of pickled onions, 1 barrel of pickled something. No one is willing to open. You open a wooden chest labeled dried fruit only, and find a pair of boots and a love letter addressed to my dearest Fig. You quietly close it again. Then comes the pantry of herbs and spices, which smells incredible like rosemary, lavender, garlic, and a faint whiff of ambition. You carefully record each bundle and note that someone has tried to pass off pebbles as rare white peppercorns. Suspicion falls on the cook's nephew. Outside, the rain has made the livestock count a muddy, mooing ordeal. Cows. 6 1 very pregnant sheep. 22 plus 1 soggy lamb hiding under a cart. Pigs. 9. Though 2 are in a sulk and refuse to be counted. Chickens. 18ish. 1 runs off mid-count. Is later spotted in the chapel. Goats. 3, including Agnes the mule, who's not a goat but insists on joining every group. A rooster attacks the steward's cloak and is promptly added to the troublemakers column. Next, the manor's toolshed. It's a organized chaos. 4 sides, 2 functional, 1 bent, 1 possibly cursed. 6 rakes, all missing at least 1 tooth. 9 buckets, 1 with a frog inside. The frog is not officially inventory, but you name him Sir Croak. There's also a box labeled extra door hinges that contains 2 playing Disiacamba spoon engraved with property of Lord Ambrose. When asked why these are here, Edric simply sighs. Later in the afternoon, you inventory the manor's clothing stores. This includes 38 tunics, mostly beige, with the occasional festive squirrel. 17 woolen hose. 6 with strategic patching. A velvet hat shaped like a fish, unknown origin. A collection of cloaks that smell faintly of mutton. Edric mutters, we're still missing that ceremonial doublet from last year's goose parade. You find it being used to insulate a beehive. The bees seem to like it. You also tally the manor's candles and tallow supply, which is a surprisingly serious task. Candle theft was real, and in a time without electricity, light was literal wealth. You count 48 tallow candles, some partially eaten by rodents or residents. You're not sure. 12 beeswax candles for fancy occasions or noble tantrums. 1 torch that smells of fish oil and poor decisions. Be sundown. Your hands are covered in ink. Your legs ache from squatting to count turnips, and you've developed a deep respect for medieval record keepers and a deep suspicion of any barrel label. Miscellaneous. Edric thanks you with a grunt and hands you a final tally sheet. It reads, total items counted, 813 items missing, 19 items inexplicably multiplied, 6 frog incidents, 1 goat-related complications, 4 unexplained cheese bites. Ongoing investigation. You head to the Great Hall for dinner and notice the spoon engraved with property of Lord Ambrose has somehow made its way back into his place setting. He does not seem surprised. As you sit down with a bowl of stew and a chunk of crusty bread, you reflect on how much this day revealed. Not just what the manor owns, but what it's made of: quirks, chaos, forgotten treasures, strange substitutions, and the quiet rhythm of people making sense of a messy world. Inventory, it turns out, isn't just about counting spoons, it's about counting stories. The clouds have cleared overnight, and this morning, the sky stretches out in a pale, promising blue. You blink sleepily as the manor bustles to life. Today, you're not just wandering aimlessly or helping with livestock, you've been invited to participate in a deeply dignified ritual of medieval prestige and coordination. A procession, not for a saint's feast, not for a wedding. No, today, the local lord is marching through town to remind everyone he exists, and to demonstrate that his socks, or at least his power, are still intact. These small local pageants, sometimes called progresses or displays, weren't just about grandeur. They were PR campaigns. Walking, jingling, velvet-draped power moves. You're handed a tunic that's technically clean and a sash that smells faintly of sheep and lavender. Baldwin ties a feathered hat to your head with the ribbon that's far too tight. You'll be a banner bearer, he says. Try not to trip or sneeze. The household gathers in the courtyard. Musicians tune up pipes, lutes, and one very enthusiastic tambourine. Two pages argue about who gets to lead the dogs. A nervous-looking man adjusts the reins of a costumed horse dressed as another horse, and then the lord emerges, clad in a doublet so shiny you could roast an egg on it. Lord Ambrose looks like someone who's absolutely convinced he is the centerpiece of the universe. His cloak trails behind him like a second opinion. Smile, someone whispers. Even if you don't know why, the procession begins. You walk slowly through the village streets, holding the manor's banner, an odd combination of a dragon, a fish, and a very stern-looking turnip. Children wave. Old ladies throw flower petals. A goose joins in for no reason at all. The whole thing is part theater, part pilgrimage, and part social memo. Don't forget who owns this place. As you move past market stalls and cottages, people bow politely, some curtsy. One child tries to poke the banner pole with a stick and is promptly shooed by a man with a bell. There are pauses at designated honor spots. The church steps, where a priest blesses the procession while accidentally quoting the wrong psalm. The blacksmith's forge, where the Lord accepts a symbolic horseshoe. The town well, where a speech is made that no one can quite hear, but everyone claps for anyway. Historians still wonder how seriously these events were taken. Were they heartfelt rituals of respect? Required attendance under social pressure? Just something to break up a slow week? Probably a mix. Your arm is sore from holding the banner, but you're oddly enjoying the rhythm of the march, the blare of the pipes, the theatricality of the whole ordeal. You start to imagine you're part of some great medieval parade of destiny. Then the goose honks aggressively and bites your hem, grounding you in reality. At midday, the procession pauses for a small feast in the field. Servants lay out blankets. Platters arrive, roast fowl, honeyed tarts, green things no one recognizes, but eats anyway. A minstrel sings a song about a knight who fell in love with his own shadow. You sit near the edge and eat quietly, watching villagers sneak second helpings and nobles pretend they don't notice. Someone's dog absconds with half a meat pie. Everyone applauds. After lunch, the Lord delivers a speech. It's full of therefores. With great honor, and we shall persist. A baby cries. The goose honks again. Then, in what can only be described as a sudden bout of medieval enthusiasm, the crowd starts dancing. Not graceful, balletic waltzes. No, this is stomping, spinning, shrieking peasant joy. Someone hands you a ribbon. A juggler appears. A lady throws her shoe into the air and doesn't catch it. You're pulled into a circle, spun twice, nearly crash into a monk, and somehow end up leading a line dance with the pig. Later, while catching your breath under a tree, Baldwin slumps beside you. Remind you of anything? He asks. Panic. You reply. He grins. Exactly. But cheerful panic. As the sun begins to lower in the sky, the procession reforms in looser, more relaxed ranks. The return to the manor is quieter, more reflective. Everyone's tired. Everyone's full. A small boy is asleep on a lute. The banner droops a little in your hands, but it feels heavier with meaning now. There was power in the pomp, sure, but also something warm in the absurdity, in the shared experience of dressing up and marching around like it meant something, which, in its own way, it did. You reach the manor gates. The cook hands out warm cider. The musicians give a final, slightly off-key flourish. The Lord nods once, dramatically, and vanishes into the hall like a magician after a show. Someone starts laughing. Someone else falls asleep on a hay bale. You take off the sash and feathered hat and sit down on a step, letting your brain settle. Maybe the pageant was silly. Maybe it was pointless. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a reminder that sometimes, to stay human in uncertain times, you have to gather, to move together, to make a little noise, and let the goose come too. You sleep in a little later this morning, no shame in that. After all, you've marched through the village with the feathered hat, danced with the pig, and survived the bureaucratic agony of medieval inventory. But today promises a different flavor of oddness. As you shuffle into the solar with a mug of something warm that may or may not be tea, you're greeted by a woman holding a tray of feathers, wax, and what looks suspiciously like crushed beetles. Time for the manners. Beauty treatments, she says cheerily. You blink. She means it. Today's focus, self-care, medieval style. The lady of the house, Lady Yeldra, is preparing for a visit from another noblewoman, and with no Sephora, no dermatologists, and no access to Pinterest, things get creative. You're asked to assist her handmaidens in preparing the necessary treatments. This includes a powdered snail shell face mask for youthfulness, a vinegar foot soak for graceful toes, a scalp salve made from egg yolks, rose water, and just a whisper of a shand. The PI-CD assistance, eyebrow removal. In this particular region and century, having a high forehead is considered the absolute height of elegance. The higher the forehead, the more noble your soul, or so the logic goes. To achieve this celestial look, many women pluck or completely remove their eyebrows. You're handed a small pair of tweezers and a jar labeled brow balm. It smells like bees and regrets. Would you like a demonstration? Asks one of the handmaids, before proceeding to tug her own brow hairs with the commitment of a knight drawing a sword. Some noble women go further, plucking not just eyebrows, but their entire hairline. Yes, you heard that right. They'll push it back an inch or more, achieving a forehead that seems to begin somewhere near the crown of the head. Fashion hurts, especially when it's enforced with hot wax and peer pressure. You gently help stir the complexion paste, which is made of lead vinegar, crushed pearls if you're wealthy, or crushed chalk. If you're not, it's applied to the face to create a pale, porcelain complexion. The pale look isn't just about beauty, it also signifies that you're wealthy enough not to have to labor under the sun. The men, not to be left out, have their own medieval grooming quirks. Beards are styled according to current fads. Some nobles sport forked beards popular with knights, while others oil theirs to a gleaming point. One visiting squire attempts to curl his mustache around a spoon. It does not go well. Perfume is also a big deal, but not the kind you're thinking of, since bathing is infrequent and hygiene is enthusiastic at best. Most scents come from sachets of herbs sewn into garments, or pomanders, small metal balls filled with pleasant-smelling substances, worn around the waist or neck. Think medieval air fresheners. You're offered one and are told it contains Clovedreed lavender crushed juniper berries, possibly a piece of last year's cinnamon toast, unconfirmed by mid-morning. The manor smells like a cross between an apothecary and a bakery. Someone knocks over the rosewater basin. A page slips on an egg yolk. The eyebrow jar is missing. A goose is blamed. And then, of course, the tooth treatments begin. Let's use the term treatment loosely. Teeth, in this era, are not expected to last a lifetime. Most dental advice revolves around avoiding hard bread crusts, rinsing your mouth with wine or vinegar, rubbing your gums with herbs, sage, mint, or salt, not smiling too much, lest people notice what's missing. A woman proudly shows off her tooth whitener, a mix of powdered charcoal and crushed mint. It works, sort of, until you realize it also stains her lips a deep gray-green. You're then invited to join the nail painting circle. Paints are made from natural dyes, berries, ash, flower petals, and applied with tiny brushes made from pig bristles. The result? A surprisingly delicate effect, the one that only lasts until you touch literally anything. As Lady Yeldra emerges in full glamour, browless, powdered, perfumed, and clad in her finest brocade, you can't help but admire the effort, even if the look is a bit haunted. Ghost with great posture, she glides down the stairs with the confidence of someone who hasn't had to smell her own snail shell mask. A younger maid leans toward you and whispers. Her eyebrows are hidden in a little box. She keeps them. You don't ask any further questions. By evening, the beauty supplies are packed away. The wine-soaked tooth rinse has run out, and the manor is returning to its less plucked, more practical self. You wash your hands in rosewater and feel a little more elegant for it, even if you still smell faintly of vinegar and violet wax. The medieval beauty regimen might be strange, slightly dangerous, and questionably effective, but there's something oddly endearing about it too, because underneath the pomanders, powders, and missing brows, everyone's really after the same thing: to feel a little prettier. To impress a guest. To win the approval of someone across the hall, or maybe just to feel in control. In a world where so much is chaotic and out of reach, you light a beeswax candle, sit by the fire, and wonder whether your own time has its own ridiculous beauty rituals that future folks will giggle at. Yes, absolutely. The morning is unusually quiet. No processions, no inventory, no runaway geese. Just the gentle hum of chores being done in the background, the scrape of a broom across flagstones, the whisper of fabric being aired out on a line, the occasional clink of a bucket. You stretch, roll your shoulders, and realize you've nearly survived an entire medieval week. But there's one last curiosity left to experience before you float away into dreams. The laws of silence. Today, the household is under a curious rule. It's not religious, though it borrows the vibe. It's not martial, but it's enforced. Once every so often, sometimes on a feast day's eve, or the day after a wedding, or even at the whim of the Lord, a quiet day is declared. You ask Baldwin, is it like a vow of silence? He shrugs. Sort of. But it's less spiritual and more practical. Nobody wants to hear each other today, and so begins the strangest event of your medieval stay. A legally enforced day of quiet. People still work, of course. Animals still need feeding. Bread still needs baking. But the usual chatter is replaced with hand signals, raised eyebrows, gentle nods, and the most expressive shrugs you've ever seen. There are rules. No shouting unless someone is on literal. Fereno singing unless it's in Latin and you're a monk. No gossiping, even by passing notes that one's written down and hung on the wall. No complaints about the quiet day, especially out loud. The lord of the manor calls it a day of serene obedience. Baldwin calls it a blessed break from complaints about turnips. You wander through the manor and its grounds, observing how people adapt. In the kitchen, cooks use wooden spoons to point and wag when needed. In the courtyard, stable hands communicate entirely through exaggerated hoof motions and finger pantomimes. In the garden, two washerwomen have developed an entire silent soap opera in gestures. An elderly woman winks at you and pulls out a small chalkboard where she's written, "I like quiet day. I can finally hear my own thoughts." At mid-morning, you're invited into the scriptorium, a quiet room where one of the Lord's cousins is copying legal codes and household rules by candlelight. You sit for a while, watching the meticulous inkwork take shape across the vellum pages. The cousin slides a note across to you. "Did you know there was once a law that required a man to smile while eating cheese in front of his landlord?" You stare, then look up. He nods seriously. Historians still argue if it was a joke. He whispers, breaking the silence just long enough to commit a historical offense. The truth is, medieval laws were often local, peculiar, and enforced based on who was around and whether they were in the mood. Some were rooted in deeply practical concerns like when to plant barley or how many eels you owed the abbey, but others veered into the bizarre. A town in France once banned onions during weddings. Some English villages required mud walking for unmarried men during Lent. In one manor roll, there's a fine for laughing during confession. In another, a rule that no pig shall wander indoors unless carrying something useful. You sit with these strange facts like marbles in your palm, smooth, round, and oddly reassuring. Humanity has always made odd rules, mostly to feel like someone, somewhere, is in charge of something. As the afternoon passes, the quiet settles deeper into your skin. Without the usual clamor, you notice more. The wind moving over the thatch, sound of bees near the herb garden, the way light moves along the walls of the great hall. It's trying to tell time. Servants seem lighter today. No one's arguing over chores. No one's accusing the goose of theft, even though it definitely still stole something. It's as if the silence itself is a balm. There's something sacred in the quiet, not just spiritual, but social. A gentle agreement to not make things harder for each other. No shouting, no posturing, no extra drama, just existing softly. As dusk arrives, candles are lit with a kind of reverence. You join the others in the dining hall, where the meal is served without fanfare. Warm stews, sweet cider, and thick slices of brown bread appear, passed hand to hand, with quiet smiles and nods. Someone taps a spoon against a mug gently. Everyone looks up. The Lord raises a hand and, with a theatrical whisper, declares, "Quiet day is over." There's a pause. Then someone sneezes, and just like that, the room erupts not into chaos, but into soft laughter, gentle conversations, and relieved exclamations. Baldwin leans in and mutters, "I stubbed my toe 4 hours ago, and didn't scream. I deserve cake." Later, you find yourself outside again, standing beneath a soft sky of stars. The manor is glowing in candlelight. The animals are tucked in. Somewhere in the distance, someone is singing, quietly out of tune. You realize something. Of all the strange laws you've encountered this week, from fish tides to hat taxes to eyebrow rules, this might be your favorite. A law not to control or punish, but to protect peace. A simple rule to make space for quiet. In a world full of noise, you take a deep breath. The air is cool, sweet, and soft on your skin. And for one last, wonderful moment, you don't say anything at all.